Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, you may.
Can you smoke in the bar here?
No, you may not. You can smoke at bars if they have a patio and they do not serve food.
Okay, but you guys serve food.
We serve food here, so you
No
can't smoke
smoking.
outside. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you smoke on the tram?
No.
No? Can you smoke in the queue for the tram?
No, can't. No, can't smoke in the queue,
Even though it's outside?
even though it's outside.
You've got a sign on the wall that says smoke-free dining, and I'm just wondering, does that mean, can we smoke in this section?
No, not at all. No smoking anywhere in San Francisco. Nowhere. They're trying to eliminate it from the streets, actually. Yes, no. Smoking, no good.
Hello and welcome to CrowdScience, the show that travels the globe to find answers to your science questions. I'm Marnie Chesterton and I'm here in San Francisco on the streets, actually right next door to a no smoking sign. Now, out of everywhere I've travelled, it has some of the toughest smoking regulations, and California has one of the lowest rates of smoking in the US. But San Francisco has one of the highest number of smoking and addiction experts in the world, which is why CrowdScience is here, because we've had an email from one man who can't seem to quit.
Hi CrowdScience, my name is Sharif Khudayberdiv and I'm calling from Termez in the south of Uzbekistan. My question is, why is it so hard to quit smoking?
Sharif is not alone. There are 1 billion smokers around the world, so this is a question that's going to affect a high percentage of CrowdScience listeners. We'll hear more from Sharif in a bit about his habit, but let me tell you, he has tried to quit, and at the risk of sounding judgmental, he probably should. The World Health Organization say that smoking kills 7 million people a year, from heart disease, respiratory problems, and of course cancer.
Most prominently lung cancer, but also pancreatic cancer, esophageal cancer, liver cancer, leukemia, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, mouth cancer.
That's a pretty nasty list of physical ailments, all due to smoking. But Sharif's question is more about smoking's effect on the brain. In particular, what a key ingredient in his cigarettes, nicotine, does to Sharif when it gets into his head. And if there's one man who knows about that, it's Professor Neil Benowitz from the University of California in San Francisco.
Nicotine is probably the most addictive drug that we have, based on the fact that 25% of people who experiment with cigarettes become regular smokers, and the vast majority smoke daily, which is different than alcohol or heroin or cocaine, where many people try those drugs and stop. When you look at people who use alcohol or heroin or cocaine and cigarettes, many studies have shown that the drug they have the hardest time quitting is nicotine.
Yes, you heard it right. Nicotine is more addictive than heroin.
When you smoke a cigarette, when you heat the cigarette, nicotine vaporizes and ends up in particles. And it gets absorbed into the lungs, where it gets absorbed very quickly and goes to the brain within 10 or 15 seconds. So you take a puff and you get an effect very fast. That's also an important part of addiction, the speed by which you see an effect.
Professor Benowitz has been researching the effects of nicotine since the 1970s, back when you could smoke in hospitals and on planes, and there were still adverts like this on TV.
Get the flavor of this big wide world. Feel the excitement from the Florida Keys to laissez-faire Greece. Peter Stuyvesant, the international passport to smoking pleasure.
But it wasn't just tobacco giants selling pleasure. Dopamine is the body's own passport to pleasure. It's a chemical in the brain, released by nerve cells to send signals to other nerve cells, often in particular brain pathways associated with rewarding behaviour. It makes you feel good, and makes you want to repeat whatever behaviour made you feel good in the first place.
When nicotine gets to the brain, it releases dopamine, it releases many other hormones as well that affect mood and behavior. And people like those effects. When you are a regular smoker, you begin to become tolerant to those effects. And after a while, you need nicotine to have a normal level of those hormones, like dopamine. And then when you quit smoking, then your levels become subnormal, and you start having withdrawal symptoms.
Neil has given me a pretty good summary of the science of why it's so hard to quit. I'm wondering if any of this holds true for listener Sharif in Uzbekistan. So I called to ask if he's ever tried to kick the habit.
I tried to stop when I entered the university. I promised not to smoke anymore to myself, but I couldn't. For example, I do some gardening work at home when I'm free, and even this simple work becomes very difficult to concentrate on. You just want to stop and do something and you don't know what's it.
What's the longest that you've managed to quit for?
I think it was a week.
Okay, and how did you do it?
I just quit. I'm not planning to use any sort of cure or I don't know, any sort of help. I want to believe in my willpower and quit someday.
And why do you want to quit?
Lately I began smoking very frequently, more than a pack a day, So one day it came to me, why smoke and kill myself? I have a family, I have kids, and I have to take good care of them.
Sharif knows smoking is bad for him, but he still can't bring himself to give it up. So is it just a question of willpower? Well, not exactly. Neil explains that the reason people become addicted in the first place is because they become used to the pleasurable feelings they get when the nicotine in cigarettes releases dopamine in their brains. But Sharif also describes how he smokes in specific situations, for example when he's gardening. I know a lot of you smokers out there will have something similar, a cigarette after a meal, with a glass of wine or a cup of coffee. Sometimes even the sound of a cigarette being lit can trigger your desire for one. So sorry if this programme drives you to smoke, that's really not the intention. The habits tobacco addicts form when they link them with smoking are another reason they find it so difficult to quit. A couple of floors down from Neil Benowitz's office at the Zuckerberg Hospital in San Francisco, a group of long-term smokers in a therapy session are comparing the situations that trigger their desire for a smoke.
If I'm generally depressed or stressed, so it's kind of like, I know I'm going to unwind.
Yeah. One of the reasons I smoke also is when I'm in pain.
I stopped smoking for almost 15 years, and I picked up a cigarette because of a death in my family. My father passed away, and then my mother passed away, so I just said, forget it.
Just like members of the group, Sharif wants to stop completely. Despite trying hard, something's preventing him from making the final push. Although nicotine addicts don't experience the same kinds of physical withdrawal symptoms as, say, heroin addicts, Neil says giving up can have a major impact on their mood.
People are often depressed. They have impairment in doing the things they do every day, concentrating, focusing. They have a hard time paying attention to things. And then there's one aspect which is, to me, very important, which is something called anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure. And one thing that was first worked out with animal studies, and then there's evidence in humans as well, is that nicotine enhances the pleasurable effects of other things you do. Food, pleasurable things you're doing in your environment, whatever you're doing is more pleasurable with nicotine. And conversely, when you quit, one thing people talk about is that nothing is really interesting in my life anymore. And that can last for months after quitting smoking. And a smoker can lapse and just have one cigarette and all of a sudden, wow, things are normal again.
These symptoms are a result of physical neural changes that occur in the brain once someone's become addicted. The way in which nicotine is delivered also makes a difference, which means it's more addictive in cigarettes than in patches or lozenges or e-cigarettes, which are all used as tools for helping people to quit.
We think that something in cigarette smoke inhibits this brain enzyme called monoamine oxidase. That's an enzyme that breaks down chemicals in the brain. So if I were to go back to the beginning of the nicotine addiction story, nicotine, like other drugs of abuse, releases dopamine in the brain. Dopamine signals pleasure. And so dopamine release is critical to nicotine addiction as well as other addictions. Monoamine oxidase inhibition from cigarette smoke inhibits the breakdown. So for any given amount of nicotine, a person gets a more intense dopamine hit. So we think that cigarette smoking is more addicting because of that.
You're listening to CrowdScience on the BBC World Service, and this week we're in San Francisco to navigate the smoke and mirrors of nicotine addiction, finding answers to listener Sharif's question about why it's so hard to kick the habit. But how has something that's only been commercially produced for a few hundred years managed to become such a draw? You might be surprised to learn that smoking wasn't always so addictive.
Tobacco in its raw form is actually very hard to inhale. It's harsh. And so since people didn't inhale it deeply, it wasn't particularly addictive, nor did it particularly likely to give them lung cancer. But at the early years of the 20th century, the Camel cigarette introduced blending and also curing with some sugar in it that made it that sweet smell that people like, that sweet taste, went deep into the lung, and that's when the addiction starts, and that's only about 100 years ago.
Meet Professor Keith Humphreys from Stanford University, a man who loves his job. We meet on a sunny day outside the psychology department.
And I can say, since I'm in the psychiatry department from the outside, it's one of the best psychology departments in the world.
And lots of lovely trees and beautiful day, occasional plane overhead, but good place for an interview.
Absolutely beautiful. It's probably a crime at some level that anyone pays me to work here.
Keith explains that the tobacco industry has, over the years, refined the product to make it something harder to quit. Knowing the power of nicotine is useful if you want to keep people coming back. And yet, not everyone is as susceptible. Here's the mystery, and Keith admits scientists don't fully understand it, but if you took a random sample of the population and forced them all to start smoking, no, you can't actually do this, there are laws against it, only some of that group would become addicted.
Our brain is plastic, meaning it can change. And that constant exposure to nicotine, and you get a lot of it from smoking, and you get it quite quickly, is causing some change in the receptors in the brain. And that increases desire to use in ways that are not well understood.
If it's all about neural changes, then does that mean that the people who smoke don't really have a choice in the matter?
The brain does matter for sure. It's where we get urges from, and also our ability to resist urges is controlled by the brain. But it's also really influenced by our behavior and by our environment. So just as an example, raising taxes on cigarettes reduces use, even among heavy smokers. So that suggests there is some ability, even among addicted people, to exercise control when the costs get really high. There's other kind of costs, too, that people are much more disapproving of smoking than they used to be, and that seems to help some people quit. So we should think of people who are, addicted, who have this brain adaptation, not as helpless, but just that it's harder for them.
It's weird when you think about it that nicotine, a chemical from the smoke from inhaling a burnt plant leaf, is having such a profound effect on the human brain. Cigarettes have only been around for a couple of hundred years. Our brains have been evolving over eons. Well, it turns out that nicotine, like most drugs, is hijacking an ancient evolutionary system.
So the same system that would have told us through evolution, you're cold, get warm, and then when you got warm said, you did the right thing. That system, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be here as a species. But it's also vulnerable. These chemicals from the outside can sort of trick that system, you could say. So people end up feeling smoking is important to my survival, which of course is the opposite of the truth. Think of this as a form of learning. So when we are young and the first time we're exposed to various foods, that maybe our parents give us, we of course, are rewarded inside our brain. It's, oh, that's good. Food tastes good. I was hungry. Now I feel better. And then when we see that food the next time, we don't need to eat it to have some reaction. I remember the color of that strawberry from last time. I want it. And that system kept our species alive, right? So that works the same way with drugs, not from birth, but after repeated exposure, our brains come to have that same reaction. So I see the cigarette commercial, or I see somebody pull out a cigarette, or I see my lighter, and I have that orienting response of, wait a minute, I want that.
Why don't you settle back and have a full-flavored smoke? Settle back with a Marlboro.
You can see that in people who are addicted to substances. You show them any cue associated with their use. When we put those people in an MRI machine, we can see activation in their brain. It's sort of like the brain saying, hey, something important is going on, pay attention to it.